Hello and welcome to Moneylife News and Views. I'm Debashis Basu. I'm sure you must have read or heard about the draconian measures banks normally take, and they have been taking even through the COVID crisis, of freezing customer accounts. This affects individuals, this affects small businessmen, this affects NRIs, affects everybody. A little bit of problem with your KYC, banks don't tell you, don't inform you, and suddenly you can't, your transaction is frozen. Now let me give you a few examples. I've changed the names to conceal the identity. Now here is a case of somebody who's a retired army officer who found his account was frozen for non-compliance of KYC. How did he get to know? One fine day, he tried to transfer some funds online, and then a pop-up came saying that, sorry, you can't do this transaction because your account is frozen. And despite having maintained a salary account and later a pension account for 30 years with the same bank, he was harassed by the bank putting a freeze on his account. Now, the bank already had his pension payment order from the government, Aadhaar card, PAN card, all of those details. And yet, without any prior intimation, the bank froze his account. Second case. One evening, Mr. Irfan Khan went to purchase fuel. He discovered his HDFC debit card was blocked. Mr. Khan learned that he was what is called KYC non-compliant. He believed that he had updated his KYC just a couple of years ago, and so he studied the RBI guidelines, and he found that bank is under an obligation to inform him that his KYC has to be, as they call it, re-KYC has to be done again. But the bank did not inform him, neither the bank gave any explanation why they simply froze his account with their own customer for non-KYC or lack of KYC or re-KYC. Mr. Rahul Singh, another case, he realized that his account with Canara Bank was frozen when a check that he had issued bounced. He insists that he submitted all the KYC documents in time, but the bank did not update its core banking database, which is why his account was frozen. Another case, Niranjan Modi discovered his joint account was frozen when he was not allowed to transfer money from his Axis Bank account. Now, these banks, it doesn't mean anything. We may mention Axis Bank, Canara Bank, HDFC Bank, these are large banks, and all of them are guilty for freezing accounts without first telling the customer. These cases are among thousands everywhere, every year or every day, who are deprived of access to their own money because banks have been recklessly freezing customer accounts. This extreme punishment, this harsh action, is imposed with impunity by bank officers without adequate notice, as I said, sufficient time for compliance with KYC submission, or as in case of NRIs, even during COVID. Unilaterally freezing an account has serious consequences, as anybody can well imagine, because there are standing instructions of payments, there are loan repayments, credit card payments, utility bill payments, etc., which may get cancelled or they may bounce. Senior citizens living on pension are reduced to helplessness when an account is frozen for no fault of theirs. Now, here is a stunning fact which we just discovered. While we were led to believe that banks have been empowered by the Reserve Bank of India and Ministry of Finance in pursuing to freeze customer accounts because of what they called having to comply with anti-money laundering laws, it now appears that neither banks nor RBI have the power to freeze customer accounts for lack of KYC. How do we know this? From a committee set up by the RBI very recently, and they released the report just last month, to look into customer service standards for banks and other RBI regulated entities. This committee, headed by former RBI Deputy Governor Mr. B.P. Kanungo, has come up with excellent recommendations that address all the major grievances of bank customers. He's covered all kinds of things. But here is a stunning admission by the committee about the freezing of accounts. In the very words of committee, and I quote, "Instances came to the notice of the committee that some banks stop operations in the account when required documents are not submitted in time by the account holder for updating KYC, even though," it is just a bland line somewhere in the report, "even though the regulation does not provide it." checks issued by account holders were dishonored in many such cases. In other words, what the banks have been doing with impunity in tens of thousands of cases are all illegal, and they've got away with it. There is no penalty for putting customers through such harassment. This has left us speechless. All this while, banks have been freezing accounts indiscriminately with the argument that we need repeated updation of identification documents to prevent the misuse of banking channels for money laundering and financial fraud. Banks in turn have said that the RBI inspectors harass them if they do not take the extreme step of freezing accounts if KYC was not updated. And we are now told that the freezing of accounts itself is illegal. The RBI has released Kanun Go Committee report and sought public comments and feedback on its recommendation, after which a decision will be made on adopting them. But meanwhile, what I would want RBI to see, and what all of us would want RBI to see, is some action on the banks which have taken these illegal steps and put us through such terrible situation. Also, why wait till 7 July on something like this, which the RBI knows that the banks freezing of accounts was illegal and caused extraordinary harassment? Why not issue a sort of directions right away to the bank to stop freezing accounts for KYC updates or lack of KYC updates? Indeed, the RBI could have acted much earlier. In response to a right to information query query raised by one of my colleagues in Moneylife about freezing of accounts, and back in January 2021, the RBI had replied, "We have not issued any specific instructions in this regard. Its master directions only ask banks to follow certain customer identification procedures." And yet, despite not having asked the banks to do, despite such huge uproar in social media and other places about the bank's punitive action, RBI remained completely aloof and impassive about the havoc caused by banks on ordinary law-abiding people. This is ostensibly in the name of preventing money laundering, when actual money laundering by crooks and criminals through banking channels continues with impunity. Fortunately, as mentioned, the committee report deals with all the major customer issues with compassion, and it acknowledged the need to fix the bank's broken and one-sided internal ombudsman system and ask for greater accountability from banks. In many cases, RBI has been issuing general directions, all this while leaving banks to implement them as they deem fit. This causes unnecessary distress for customers because interpretations differ widely. One bank is doing one thing, another bank is doing another thing for the same so-called directions from RBI. Such general directions should be replaced with standard operating procedures, which is the same for all banks and all branches of all banks. Because especially in dealing with nomination and succession issues, which is another major pain point. The committee also notes that technology should be a two-way street, and new accounts and services can be availed online, then the closure should also happen online. A well-known industrialist actually told me that it is so difficult and irritating to close a bank account that in many cases they just leave 500 rupees in the account and walk away without bothering to go through the process of closure. Hopefully, the committee report will be implemented in a manner that would eliminate this and numerous other forms of aggravation that the banks routinely inflict on their own customers. But a little bit of proactive action on RBI in wrapping banks on their knuckles would have been fair. If you liked what I've just said, please subscribe and please do share. Thanks for watching.